Sign the transfer today or we destroy your license. Patricia Anderson. My adoptive mother delivered the threat like a judge passing sentence. Uncle Robert, retired lawyer, smirked as if victory was already his. James and Linda, the golden children, sat rigid at her side, their silence louder than any verdict. Across the polished table, 3 attorneys in identical gray suits slid papers toward me, yellow tabs marking where my future was supposed to vanish. My chest tightened, but my voice came out steady, almost amused. Funny, I said, because I brought someone too. The room froze. Their smiles faltered. Hi, I'm Claire Anderson, daughter in this story. It wasn't always about conference rooms and threats printed on letterhead. For me, it began with a garbage bag of clothes pressed into my arms at 8 years old the night my world collapsed. My parents died in a car accident, and Patricia Anderson, my mother's distant cousin, took me in. She stood on her porch that night, pearl earrings gleaming in the porch light, and said words that carved into me deeper than the cold. You should be grateful. Not everyone would take in someone else's child. From then on, gratitude wasn't a feeling, it was a rule. At birthdays, James unwrapped car keys while I unwrapped socks. When Linda opened tuition checks, I scraped tips from the diner where I worked nights to afford community college. Summers meant Hawaiian vacations for them, and me staying behind because, as Patricia explained with a sympathetic smile, there were only 4 tickets this year. Even in silence, the message was clear: you're not one of us. Christmas cards showed the Andersons in matching sweaters, golden retriever included. My face never made it onto the glossy print, and yet I tried. I did chores before anyone asked. I kept my voice low. I laughed at the right times. I thought maybe if I performed gratitude perfectly, they'd forget I was someone else's child. But no matter what I did, I was always reminded. At 12, I overheard Patricia whisper to a neighbor, "She's a phase, not a future." At 17, I pinned my nursing school acceptance letter inside my closet because the fridge was already full of Linda's theater posters. Then Eleanor arrived. Patricia's mother-in-law, widowed and sharp as a tack, moved in when I was 15. She carried herself with the kind of presence that filled a room without speaking. Unlike everyone else, she looked at me and didn't see a burden, she saw possibility. She claimed a study in the house, its shelves lined with books, and the faint scent of peppermint oil. In that study, she taught me chess. Sit, she said the first time, gesturing to the chair across from her. You can tell everything about a person by how they open. She meant chess, but she also meant life. We played countless games, each lesson sinking deeper than the moves on the board. Control the center, she whispered when my pawns faltered. Patience wins more than anger ever could. And my favorite, never interrupt your enemy while they're making a mistake. When James bragged about his new BMW, Eleanor simply nudged her rook across the board and said, "Material advantage means nothing without strategy." When Linda pouted over a new dress, Eleanor placed her bishop carefully and murmured, "Vanity makes people predictable." She didn't just play chess with me, she prepared me. When her health began to fail years later, I became her shadow. I left work early to spoon soup into her mouth-massaged lotion into her hands when arthritis flared and slept in a stiff green chair beside her bed. Patricia sighed about the burden Robert suggested the cheapest nursing home. James and Linda appeared only when they needed money. Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. Sometimes I'd come home to find visitors with briefcases and the study documents spread out like chessboards of their own. Estate planning, she would say, with a sly smile winking at me like she had just captured another queen. I didn't press. I trusted her. When she passed, the house fell silent. Patricia handled the funeral like a corporate event, whispering to Robert about nuisance clauses and protecting the legacy. And then the will was read. Everything, every cent, every asset was left to me. The room erupted. Patricia called it confusion. Robert muttered undue influence. James mumbled about fairness. Linda burst into tears. I sat frozen, numb. Not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, someone had publicly chosen me. In that moment, I realized Eleanor had been teaching me more than chess. She had been playing a long game I didn't fully understand yet, a game where love strategy and foresight mattered more than bloodlines or titles. And as Patricia's glare burned into me that day, I remembered Eleanor's final lesson: control the center. The letter came disguised as courtesy a neatly worded request from Patricia to clarify inheritance matters. But I knew better. Patricia didn't request. She orchestrated. That Tuesday morning, I walked into the glass and marble lobby of Johnson & Associates, my heels echoing against the floor like small warnings. Everything about the location screamed intimidation. The receptionist barely glanced up. Conference room C. They're waiting. They. The word made my stomach knot, but my face stayed calm. I had worn my nurse's composure like armor: steady voice, steady breath, steady spine. The heavy oak door swung open to reveal my nightmare in flesh. Patricia sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, pearls gleaming. To her right was Uncle Robert, retired lawyer, eyes sharp with practiced arrogance. James and Linda sat like obedient statues, their presence less about support and more about spectacle. But it was the other side of the table that made my chest tighten. 3 attorneys in identical gray suits, folders, open pens poised. Yellow tabs dotted the papers like landmines, each one a signature line that could erase me. Patricia's voice was smooth as oil. "Claire, darling, sit. We have documents to review." I sat slowly, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. Robert leaned forward. "We're simply ensuring things are handled properly. $2.5 million is a substantial sum. It rightfully belongs to the family. The family. As if I had ever been part of that word. Patricia slid a paper toward me. "This is a voluntary transfer of inheritance rights. Standard procedure. Sign and all unpleasantness disappears." I glanced at the heading. Transfer of inheritance. Translation: surrender everything Eleanor left me. James cleared his throat. "We're not saying you don't deserve something. But while I'm struggling to keep my position at Mom's company and Linda can't even find steady work, $2.5 million is excessive." Linda nodded eagerly, her $3,000 handbag resting on the table, like proof of her hardship. "We're her real grandchildren," she added softly, twisting the knife. Robert's smirk widened. "Courts often overturn wills in cases like this. Undue influence, non-blood beneficiary isolation tactics. Red flags everywhere." Patricia's eyes gleamed. "You manipulated her, Claire. You kept her from us. Classic elder abuse." The words hit like a slap. I had spent months at Eleanor's bedside, changing linens, holding her hand, listening to her stories, while Patricia complained about burdens. And now they dared accuse me of abuse. The first lawyer slid a page forward, voice clinical. "If you refuse, the family will pursue legal action, undue influence, elder abuse, fraud. Your nursing license would be in jeopardy." My chest burned. They weren't just coming for money. They were coming for the only thing I had built for myself: my career, my patience, my name. I saw flashes of hospital hallways, colleagues' faces turning cold, my license revoked, my life dismantled. For a heartbeat, I wavered. But then Eleanor's voice whispered from memory control the center. "Don't waste moves proving you belong. You already do." I straightened in my chair, meeting Patricia's gaze. She expected fear. Instead, I gave her calm. "You've planned this well," I said softly. 3 lawyers' threats, rehearsed accusations lined up. Patricia's smile sharpened. "So you understand your position?" "Funny," I replied, leaning forward, voice steady now, almost amused. "Because I brought someone too." The room froze. Robert's pen slipped. Linda gasped. James blinked. Even Patricia's smile faltered just for a moment. And that moment was enough. Because for the first time, I wasn't the grateful outsider waiting for their scraps. I was Eleanor's granddaughter, and I had finally reached my breaking point. The silence after my words was knife-sharp. Patricia blinked once, twice, like a queen who hadn't expected her pawn to move. Robert's smirk faltered. Linda glanced between faces, lost without a script. Even the attorneys' gray suits, blending like shadows, looked up with something new in their eyes, uncertainty. Then the door opened. Harold Harrison walked in as if he'd been expected all along. 70 years old, silver-haired suit, pressed to perfection. He carried a leather briefcase polished by decades of courtroom victories. He nodded to me first, then addressed the room with effortless calm. "Good morning. I'm Harold Harrison, senior partner at Harrison & Cranky. I believe you're discussing my client's inheritance." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Your client Claire doesn't have a lawyer." "She's had one for 6 months," Harrison replied smoothly. "Ever since Eleanor Anderson retained me to protect her granddaughter from precisely this situation." The weight of his words tilted the room. Robert leaned forward, voice sharp. "This is highly irregular. It's highly prepared." Harrison corrected, sliding his briefcase onto the table. He unlatched it with deliberate precision, pulling out a thick folder stamped "Confidential, Estate of Eleanor Anderson." He placed it dead center. "Before we proceed, I should note that this conference room is under audio-visual surveillance. Signs are posted at every entrance. By stepping inside, you all consented to recording." The attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. One looked at the ceiling, spotting the tiny black dome of a camera. Another shifted in his chair. "Excellent," Harrison continued. "That means the threats just made accusations of elder abuse, coercion, professional ruin are now preserved as evidence. A useful detail, don't you think Patricia's mask cracked? This is ambush tactics." "No," Harrison said softly, sliding out the first document. "This is foresight. Something Eleanor excelled at." On the table lay Eleanor's updated will, signed, notarized, and witnessed. Behind it, a sealed DVD. "Video testimony," Harrison explained, "recorded in my office 2 years before Eleanor's death. 3 independent witnesses present her physician, a retired judge, and her parish priest. All attested to her sound mind. Robert's voice was brittle. Video evidence is flimsy, which is why Harrison replied, we also have sworn statements. And medical evaluations confirming Eleanor scored in the 98th percentile for cognitive health." He set down another file heavier than the last. Its cover bore multiple seals. "This is an irrevocable trust filed in 3 states. With a penalty clause, any family member who contests the will, threatens litigation, or attempts to coerce Claire forfeits $5 million to her estate." Linda gasped. James whispered, "That can't be legal." "It's airtight," Harrison said. "Drafted and reviewed by 3 independent firms. Eleanor wanted ironclad protection. She knew you would come for Claire." Patricia's hand trembled, but she reached for the papers anyway. "This is fraud. My mother wasn't in her right mind. She was," Harrison countered, "and she knew you. In fact, she left more than legal documents." He pulled out transcripts, emails, phone calls, summaries, even text messages. Exhibit A, Patricia's email 3 years ago. "Once mother passes, we'll minimize Claire's involvement. She was always the stray." Exhibit B, Robert advising Patricia to contest any will favoring Claire, recommending undue influence as the tactic. Exhibit C, James texting friends about how much he expected to inherit, writing, "If Claire gets more than me, I'll burn it all down." Color drained from James's face. Linda's tears began. Robert's fist clenched around nothing. Patricia's eyes darted calculating exits. Through it all, I sat still. For years, I had been their scapegoat, silent, grateful. Now I had something they didn't expect, proof. Patricia tried again, voice sharp as glass. "We'll bury her anyway. No one will hire a nurse accused of abuse." "Correction," Harrison said, snapping the folder shut. "No one will hire a nurse falsely accused when the threats are on record, which, as of this moment, they are." The attorneys shifted further away from their clients, no longer allies, but potential witnesses. One cleared his throat. "Mrs. Anderson, perhaps we should—" Quiet Patricia barked, but the cracks were spreading. Harrison leaned back, folding his hands. "You came here thinking Claire was defenseless. What you didn't know is that Eleanor left her granddaughter not only assets, but armor. Every move you made today was predicted years ago, and now checkmate is one signature away. I felt my chest loosen for the first time since walking into that room. Patricia had built her ambush with lawyers and threats. Eleanor had built mine with love and foresight. For the first time, I realized I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was winning. For a moment, no one breathed. The folder lay like a live grenade in the middle of the polished table. Then the explosion came not from paper, but from voices. "You manipulated her," Patricia shrieked, slamming her palm against the table. The pearls at her neck rattled like teeth. "You kept her from us, poisoned her against her real family." Robert leaned forward, his lawyer's tone booming. "This so-called trust is flimsy at best. I've seen 100 like it torn apart in court. You think one old woman's paranoia will stand against decades of precedent?" Linda's voice cracked into a wail. "This is theft. She tricked Grandma. Everyone knows it." And James, usually the polished salesman, snapped like brittle glass. "Do you even hear yourself, Claire? You're tearing this family apart over money you don't deserve." The chorus battered me like waves, but I remembered Eleanor's words whispered across a chessboard. In chaos, the calm player controls the game. So I sat spine straight, hands folded, saying nothing. Harrison, unshaken, slid another file onto the table. His voice cut through their shouting like a clean scalpel. "If we're trading accusations, let's review Exhibit A, the bold heading email Patricia Anderson 2020. He read it aloud. "Once Mother passes, we'll minimize Claire's involvement. She was always the stray. I'll make sure the money stays where it belongs with us." Patricia lunged for the folder, but Harrison pulled it back without effort. Exhibit B, he continued placing a transcript beside the first. A phone call between Robert and Patricia 18 months ago. Robert advises using undue influence as grounds to overturn any will favoring Claire. Robert's face flushed crimson. That was private. "It was recorded legally," Harrison cut in. "Your mother owned the line. She granted Eleanor access, perfectly admissible." Linda's sobs grew louder, mascara streaking. James muttered curses under his breath. And Exhibit C Harrison added almost casually James's text messages speculating about his cut. Quote, "If Claire gets more than me, I'll burn it all down." James shot to his feet. "That was a joke. No jury will laugh," Harrison replied. The hired attorneys were silent now, their pens resting idle. They no longer looked like advocates. They looked like men calculating their retreat. Patricia slammed her chair back, fury vibrating in her voice. "This is character assassination. None of it matters. Claire isn't real family. Blood matters." That word blood hit like a whip. My chest tightened, but instead of shrinking, I stood. Blood didn't sit by her bed every night. Blood didn't spoon broth into her mouth when her hands shook. Blood didn't rub lotion into her swollen joints or hold her when she cried. I did. The room fell quiet just for a second. Patricia's face twisted. "You think a few months of caretaking outweighs a lifetime of family ties, a lifetime of neglect," I shot back. "Yes, it does." Her mouth opened, ready to strike again, but Harrison interrupted. "Perhaps we should let Eleanor speak for herself." He tapped the tablet. The screen glowed, and suddenly Eleanor's face filled the room, sharp-eyed, regal, unmistakably lucid. "Hello, Patricia," she said, voice clear as glass. "If you're watching this, it means you're doing exactly what I feared trying to steal from Claire." Patricia staggered back as though the screen had struck her. Robert froze mid-sentence. Linda sobbed harder. James stared like he'd seen a ghost. On the video, Eleanor folded her hands. "You've spent years reminding Claire she wasn't one of you, but I saw her. I saw her kindness, her strength, her patience. She gave me love without asking for anything in return. That's why she gets everything. And if you try to take it from her..." She leaned forward, eyes burning. "Then you will lose far more than you bargained for." Harrison paused the video. The silence afterward was heavier than their shouting had been. Patricia finally found her voice, though it trembled. "This is manipulation, a dying woman." She was sharper than any of you, Harrison said, and she planned every detail. Robert's bravado faltered. James sank back into his chair. Linda buried her face in her hands. Patricia gripped the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright, and me. For the first time in my life, I felt the board shift. The game wasn't theirs anymore, it was mine. Harrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply placed a slim document on the table, the pages clipped neatly. Cease and desist agreement, he explained. Sign this and the matter ends. No penalties triggered. No disclosures. You walk away and never contact Claire about the inheritance again. Patricia barked out a laugh, too loud, too sharp. You're bluffing. Harrison tapped the tablet once more. The video resumed. Eleanor sat in the same chair, her voice steady. Patricia, Robert, James, Linda. I know you. I know the greed in your hearts. That's why I created provisions. Contest my will, threaten Claire, or attempt to coerce her, and the penalties will activate automatically. The color drained from Robert's face. Automatic, yes, Harrison said, pulling out a second folder. Filed in 3 states, reviewed by 3 separate firms. Eleanor anticipated every tactic you're attempting today. James shifted uncomfortably. You can't expect us to just sign. Harrison's smile was almost gentle. That's exactly what I expect. Otherwise, by sundown, the IRS receives Patricia's financial discrepancies. The State Bar gets Robert's recorded advice, and James's employer receives a copy of his texts. The 3 hired attorneys began packing up quietly. One of them muttered, "We can't represent you further." Ethical conflict. And just like that, Patricia's army vanished through the door. The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia's hands trembled on the table. Linda sobbed openly, mascara streaking her cheeks. James stared at the ceiling as if answers might be written there. I took a deep breath, the weight of years pressing against my ribs. You want receipts? I pulled out my checkbook, scribbled quickly, and slid the paper across the table. $50,000. By your accounting, that covers every dime you ever spent raising me. We're square now. Patricia stared at the check as though it were poison. This is more than money, I said. My voice surprised even me, steady, calm, unbroken. This is closure. You can't throw gratitude in my face anymore. I paid your bill. Robert finally snatched the pen from the table and signed. James followed his signature shaky. Linda blotted tears with her sleeve, then scrawled her name. Only Patricia hesitated. She looked at me with eyes that once reduced me to silence. I tried to make you one of us, she whispered. No, I said quietly. You tried to make me small. Grandma made me whole. The pen shook in her grip, then scratched her name across the page. Harrison gathered the signed agreements, fed them through the scanner, and set stamped copies before each of them. Effective immediately, he said. Any violation triggers full penalties. Patricia shoved her chair back. This isn't the end. I stood too. It is, at least for me. She sneered. Your parents would be ashamed of you. Once those words would have gutted me. Now I met her eyes without flinching. The woman who raised me would be proud. And that's all that matters. Patricia faltered, then stormed toward the door, Robert and the others trailing behind. The latch clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the glass walls. Harrison reached into his briefcase one last time. She left this for you, he said softly, handing me a cream-colored envelope with my name in Eleanor's looping script. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside was a single line written in ink that pressed deep into the paper. They never deserved you, my darling girl. Now go live the life you were meant to live. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. But these weren't the tears of a grateful outsider begging for scraps. They were tears of release, of being chosen, of finally knowing I was enough. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "Thank you." For once, the silence in the room didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. News of the confrontation didn't stay contained within that conference room. Like ink spreading through water, the story seeped into every corner of our family's world. By the end of the month, the fallout was undeniable. Patricia lost her largest client. The medical supply company that had done business with Mitchell Industries for over a decade quietly withdrew, citing ethical concerns. She tried to spin the narrative, but word travels fast when lawyers and assistants gossip over cocktails. Her empire wobbled not from my hand, but from the rot Eleanor had already seen years before. Robert's fate came quicker. The state bar reviewed his recorded advice to Patricia. Even retired a lawyer cannot misuse his title to encourage fraud. He was censured publicly, his reputation shredded. For a man who lived on respect, the humiliation was worse than any fine. James called me once, his voice stripped of swagger. I got demoted, he admitted. They saw the deposition video Harrison played, said it showed poor judgment. I'm back in junior sales. His silence stretched. Linda's working part-time at a coffee shop. Mom barely leaves the house. I didn't gloat. All I ever wanted was peace, I told him. He hesitated. We should have stood up to her, Claire. We all knew. We just didn't. I know, I said softly. Maybe now you can start. He hung up without goodbye. I didn't call back. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to stay in ash. 6 months later, the Eleanor Anderson Memorial Clinic opened its doors. We chose a renovated warehouse on the east side the neighborhood Patricia had always called dangerous. To me, it wasn't danger. It was forgotten people who deserved to be remembered. On opening day, 147 patients walked through the doors. Single mothers juggling jobs, elderly couples who'd been splitting pills to make them last, children who hadn't seen a doctor in years. They filled the waiting room with stories Eleanor would have listened to, cared for, fought for. We hired doctors from the neighborhood people who understood the struggle firsthand. Maria, our pharmacy tech, had aged out of foster care at 18. When I handed her a clinic badge, she cried and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a place to belong." Above the reception desk hangs Eleanor's portrait, young, determined eyes fierce. Beneath it, a plaque, "Love is the greatest inheritance." Patients touch it sometimes on their way out as if thanking her themselves. 3 months after the opening, a letter arrived from the Morrison Foundation, inside a check for $500,000. The note read, "In honor of Eleanor Anderson, whose vision continues through her granddaughter's courage." I later learned the director had played bridge with Eleanor for years. She was still opening doors for me, even from beyond the grave. One evening, I found James standing outside the clinic. He looked older, his tie loose in the weight of choices, hanging heavy. "It's impressive," he said quietly. "Thanks." "Mom drove by last week," he added. "She sat in her car for an hour just staring. She'll never admit it, but I think she knows what she lost. Not the money, the chance to be part of something good." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $1,000. On the memo line, "For the kids who don't belong anywhere else." I pinned it to our donation wall right beside a crayon drawing from a little girl that said, "Thank you for helping my grandma breathe." A year has passed now. The clinic sees more than 500 patients a month. We've expanded into dental care, mental health counseling, and a small food pantry. Every day I walk into that building and feel Eleanor's presence, not in the money she left, but in the strength she gave me to claim my worth. I still live in my one-bedroom apartment. I still wear the same watch Eleanor gave me. Wealth didn't change who I am. It amplified what she already saw. Patricia and I haven't spoken. Through James, I hear she's in therapy. I wish her peace, but she'll find it without me. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're survival. Every morning I stop beneath Eleanor's portrait. I press my hand to the plaque and whisper, "Thank you for believing in me." And if I listen closely in the hum of the city, I hear her answer, "You were always enough, my darling girl. Always." So I'll ask you, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this gave you courage, please like, subscribe, and pass it on, because the greatest inheritance isn't money, it's strength.